Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure out our beans, and then we're going to sort through them just to make sure there's no rocks or anything in them. And since we're making pints, we're going to do a half a cup per pint. If you were doing quarts, you'd do a whole cup. And you can see already that something like that you want to throw out. You just kind of pick through them. All the bad beans. There could be even a little stick or just anything like that that you don't want in your beans. And then after we sort through it, we're going to rinse them real good. So I'm going to measure up 1, 2, 3, 4.5 cups of black beans. Okay, let's go over everything that we need to can up these dry beans. Now, most of y'all commented that you had, or that you want to start out with a 16 quart Presto pressure cooker, and that's what I've got here. I've also got the 23 quart too. But since that's what y'all got, that's what we're going to do tonight. So I've got my cooker here on my stove, and I've got, you can tell how much this has been used. I got 3 quarts of water. So you want to make sure you put 3 quarts of water in here. And I put about 2 tablespoons of vinegar in here because my water is very, very hard water. And here we got the lid, the top to the pressure cooker. This is the weight that goes on your spout here. I'll put this up here. Right here is your gauge that you'll be going by. Of course, this is your little, when that comes up to pressure, that'll pop up. Then your this little rubber thing here, forget what that's called. But you always want to make sure, always check your stuff out real good before you start canning. I don't care if you canned last night and you're going to can again in the morning. Check your seal out. Always check your seal and make sure it's still good. It's not dry rotted or something's happened to it. Make sure it's in there good. And I'll tell you something else I do. I take it up to the light, and I make sure, I don't know if y'all can see through this or not. Let me see if I can get it. But anyways, I take it up to the light and I make sure that I can see through that hole. So let me see. Yeah, I can see right through it, but for some reason it's not picking it up on the camera. But I can see daylight through it, which means it's clean. That hole is clean. It's not obstructed with dirt or lime or anything. And most of the time I'll just go ahead and take a toothpick or something and kind of clean it out. So we're good there. Just always check your lid and make sure everything's good. Of course, we got our black beans over here. I've got my 9-pint jars that have been cleaned and sterilized. They're not hot because I'm not starting out with anything hot. My beans are just at room temperature, or whatever you want to say. My jar's at room temperature. My water's at room temperature. The water in my canner's at room temperature. And this is just the way that I do my beans. I don't start out soaking or cooking my beans so that my beans are hot. I don't have, the water here is not hot. My jars are not hot, because if you start out, say for instance, with hot beans and cold jars, you're liable to bust your jars. So that's just what we'll do with all of this being at room temperature. Once we get it in the canner, turn the fire on, it's all going to come up to temp all together. So that's the way I do my beans. Right here we got our lids, 9 lids, warm water. We've got our little dilly here that's got a magnet on it to get our lids. We've got our debubbler. I've got a half a teaspoon because we'll be putting a half a teaspoon of canning salt. Now, there's been times that I was out of canning salt and I used my Himalayan pink salt, and my beans done just fine. And right here, this is where these beans become your own. And when I say that, you can put spices in it, any kind of spice that you like. And in my black beans, because I use my black beans for a lot of fiesta dishes and stuff like that, for chilies and just different things like that. So what I like to do is I like to put a half a teaspoon of garlic and a half a teaspoon of cumin. So, like I said, this is just extra. This is not something you have to do, but you can make your beans your own and give them whatever kind of little seasoning or spice you want. Of course, I got the rings over here ready too. So, now that we've got all of this ready and ready to go, let's get started canning some beans. A while ago, I forgot to mention the jar lifter. You need one of them definitely. So let's get started canning our beans. And I'm going to start right up here with the 3 jars that y'all can see up close. And I'm going to get my beans. Now what I found out a while ago when I was cleaning my beans, I only had enough black beans for 7 pints. So I went to the pantry and I found some of my small red beans. So I got a cup of those and cleaned those up real good. So I'll be finishing off 2 of my pints with small red beans, which is okay. So, and even after picking through these, you can still go through there and see there. You may find some more beans that don't look so good. So I got my half a cup measuring cup. We're going to put a half a cup in each pint jar. And like I said, it's half a cup to a pint and a whole cup to a quart. And I'm going to quit there so we can just go on. I can show you the rest of it. And this is where you're going to put a half a teaspoon of your salt. And this is where you can put your spices and seasonings too. I'm going to put a half a teaspoon of garlic in each one. And I'm going to put a half a teaspoon of ground cumin. Now if you want to put a little chili powder or just anything like that, and you don't have to put any kind of seasoning, you can just put your half a teaspoon of salt and that'll be just fine. So now we're just going to pour our water, and I'm going to pour it to an inch headspace, which is right up to the bottom of your rings right here, right up to the neck of your pint jars. And you can use a good vegetable broth, or you can use a chicken broth too, if you want to do that instead of using water. That's just up to you. A lot of times if I'm using broth, I will use hot jars, hot broth. So, but my beans are, you know, they're just room temperature. But I would make sure that my broth was hot and my jars were hot if I was using broth. I don't know, it's just the way I do it. So, after we got all that in there, we're just going to take our debubbler. And I tell y'all, when I can black-eyed peas, dried black-eyed peas, they're so small and they don't really swell up very much. So I'll find myself putting a little more than half a cup in a pint jar. Because if I don't get enough in my jars. There's just not enough in there for a meal. So, but most of the time I do it in quart jars anyways. But black-eyed peas, dried black-eyed peas don't swell up like pinto beans and white beans. And really these little bitty black beans here don't swell up as much either. But usually my black beans is something that I use as a filler with a lot of my dishes, casseroles and stuff like that. So I usually, you know, don't need a whole lot. So this right here does just fine. So what I've done is I just kind of stirred my beans. Just like that. Because you're not going to have a whole lot of bubbles in there. There's so much liquid. So I feel like that's good. Now, I'm going to grab my tea towel. And I would just go over. Make sure you go over the very top. Make sure there's no debris on there that'll keep your lids from sealing. Now these, your pints, once we get them up to pressure, they're going to cook. Here at my house, it will be 10 pounds of pressure for 75 minutes. And for quarts, it would be 10 pounds of pressure for 90 minutes. So for pints, you need to check, and I'll give you a website to go to check for your altitude and stuff, for what pressure your gauge needs to be at. So you're just going to take your warm lids. Now used to, they would tell you to boil and make sure your lids were just scalding hot, and anymore they don't. Because a lot of times it'll take that rubber and almost ruin that seal around there if it's too hot. So I'm just going to put it on, the rings on finger tight, which means you only want it tight enough that your little fingers will get it. You don't want to take it, you know, and just ram it down on there. And I tell you, sometimes I'd have to, because I've got arthritis so bad in my fingers, sometimes I feel like I don't get it tight enough when it's finger tight. So I take my thumb and just kind of make sure that I've got it on there good. So anyways, that's all there is to that. And this will be the same with any bean, pretty much. And I'm going to finish filling up my jars, and we're going to get them in the canner. I just want to read off some beans that are very good to can, like this. And that's pinto, navy beans, black-eyed peas, garbanzo beans, great northern beans, fava beans, red beans, kidney beans, black beans. Your green peas tend to turn to mush. And they don't can very good, your dry green peas. There is a way of canning them. I think this summer when my green peas come off, we'll get into canning green peas, because there is a way that you can can them without making plum mush out of them. But a lot of people just blanch them and put them in the freezer. So I'm going to finish getting my jars ready and get them in the canner, and then we'll go from there. Okay, we got our pint jars in the pressure canner, and we're going to put our lid on now. Now right here, what you'll see is an arrow. And you want to take your lid, and mine is so old that you can barely see it, but there is an arrow right here. And I'm going to line this arrow up with that one. And you can see how hard my water is. And I even use vinegar and stuff to clean that. But I mean, it's fine. It's just been used so much. But I'm going to, this arrow here and this arrow, I'm going to line it up. And watch me have problems. Just because I'm trying to show you, that's all. There. Get on there. See, I ain't got my glasses on. Right there's the arrow. There's the arrow. You see how it went down like that. Then I'm just going to take it and I'm going to pull it towards me just like that. Then I'm going to turn my stove on, about medium high. I'm going to let it come up to pressure, and then steam's going to start coming out this little hole. And once it really starts coming out of that hole like that and really steam coming out, I'm going to turn my timer on for 10 minutes. And I'm going to let that steam like that for 10 minutes before we put our weight on. So because everything was at room temperature when we started, it's going to take just a little bit of while for it to come up. So just be patient with it, and don't think you've done anything wrong, but you will eventually see that steam coming out of this spout. Just give it a little bit of time. Okay, let's talk about the jar for just a minute, because I failed to mention that your jars. You always need to check your jars for any kind of cracks. Look at the bottom, make sure there's no chips or anything. And very importantly, here on your top, just kind of slightly rub your finger on there and make sure there's no chips in that jar, because if there is, it's not going to seal. So check your jars good. And I also wanted to tell you that when you're buying beans and you want to try to figure out how many pounds of beans that you need, if you're doing 9 pints in your 16-quart canner, you need 3 1/4 pounds of dry beans is what you'll need to fill your 16-quart canner up. If you're doing 7 quarts of dry beans, you need 5 pounds for 7 quarts. So that might kind of help you out there. But anyways, I'm waiting for this to get up to temp. I'm waiting for my steam to start. And from there, it's easy peasy, because I've been telling y'all, I've been getting a lot of people message me that they've either not ever canned before or they haven't canned in a long time, and they're real anxious about starting. So Miss Lori, would you do some canning videos? And I have some older canning videos, but I thought, yes, I'm needing to do some canning. And of course, canning season is fixing to get here for sure. But I love to can beans. For some reason, it's just one of my favorite things to do. And one thing is because it's so easy. But you can buy dry beans so cheap. And you can even buy them bulk online. And you can put up a lot of jars of beans in your pantry. It's cost efficient and so much better for you. And once you ever get started canning these beans, you'll have a whole pantry full of different kinds of beans because you like it so much. So y'all hang with me, and we'll finish canning these beans. Okay, the steam is coming out the steam spout now, you can see. Because everything was at room temperature, it took a good 25 minutes for it to get to this point, because all of that had to heat up. Your jars had to heat up, all that had to heat up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to time it for 10 minutes now. You see how that steam's coming out of there real good. So we're going to time it for 10 minutes. Okay, it's been 10 minutes. Little spouts popped up. Now we're going to put our weight on. What we're going to do is I usually have to turn mine down just a little bit. We're going to watch our gauge. And for me, it's 10 pounds. We'll watch our gauge, and when it gets to 10 pounds, we'll start timing it. And we're going to time it for 75 minutes. Okay, my gauge is at 10 pounds, so I'm going to put my timer on for 75 minutes. Okay, it's been 75 minutes, and I turn the heat off. And I'm going to let it sit here for at least an hour till all the pressure comes down. And it should be safe then. Take the lid off. And we'll take our jars out.